Order. I'm sorry it's late for our special board meeting here with Susan Stewart. So our first presentation would be a presentation from Rural Solar Development Coalition. Ms. Stewart.
All right, well, thank you all again for having me here today, and I guess blame it on Dale Clark is all I can say. So
that's a good one to blame it on.
It's you know, it all when you're this far from home, and when you say the one person you know out this way, everybody shakes their head. I guess you start out in trouble. But anyway, you behave back there, Dale. Well, thank you all again for having me, and I know that I shared the history of the coalition with Mr. Haney, but for those of you who don't kind of know the background of how we started, I wear two hats in the solar world. Like you all, I'm on the Sussex County Board of Supervisors. I'm vice chair this year. I've been chairman the past 6 years in a row. And I told the boys that Mama was tired and somebody else needed to be chairman this year. So they demoted me to vice chair. I also, in my day job, I'm a lobbyist and consultant. So I've spent the past 30 years at the General Assembly representing a number of clients. And in 2020, a couple counties in Southside Virginia came to me and said, we are really getting overrun by solar. We really need some economic tools. You know, we'd like to hire you to represent our counties sort of over and above what VACO can do. They've got a staff of basically 4 folks at the General Assembly, and they've got hundreds of issues. And I said, well, I'm flattered, but frankly, the issue is bigger than your county and my county and me. So I partnered with my friend Robert Crockett, who could not be here today, but I'm a one-man shop, me, myself, and I, but Advantage Strategies is a firm in Richmond that does a lot of local government work. So I went to Robert and said, look, I think there's a need here. Could I partner with you? And we developed this coalition. So that's how we started in 2020. And it really was 3 years ago. It was sort of a defensive measure because I think you all might be on the tail end of it a little bit, but in my county in Sussex, our first project went online my second year on the board. So we had a 20 megawatt project developed by Virginia Solar, acquired by Dominion with the power purchase agreement for Amazon, and that went online, like I said, in 2017. So in my own county, I had to get very educated very quickly because we're in that south side corridor where the land is cheap and flat, and that's what folks want. So that's sort of the origination of how we came to be. We now have a number of counties. I know I sent Mr. Haney the list, but basically we have a number of counties in Southside, Mecklenburg, Halifax, Charlotte, Prince George, Richmond County here on the Northern Neck, Appomattox, Orange County, Sussex County, of course. Interestingly enough, Chesterfield County, which is not a rural county, a very sort of urban county outside of Richmond, Chesterfield actually joined, and we let them in even though they're not a rural county. Chesterfield really joined because they realized as the legislation has developed and built year over year with all of these revenue tools, they realized they were probably leaving money on the table because they really didn't know what the revenue tools were, how to use them, how to use a siting agreement, etc. So Chesterfield has joined the party as well. The coalition has, at a minimum, monthly calls. We will typically have a special guest every month on our call. Last month we had Dominion on the call. They frequently join in. We often have the State Corporation Commission because, of course, they value these projects utility scale on a tax basis. We've developed a really good relationship with the SCC Public Utility Taxation Division. So we'll have a number of guests. And the other service Robert and I provide is if you're updating or creating your zoning and comp plan language, we assist with that. We have a Google Docs library for all of our members that share, site plan conditions, conditional use or special use permits, their zoning and comp plan language, their siting agreements. So we keep battery storage conditions, recommended conditions. So we have a document library that people can use. So anyway, we're in our third year, and that's sort of the background on the coalition. And I'll just say, as a supervisor, my opinion of solar has shifted. When it first came to Sussex, I was overwhelmed and afraid of it. And I just wanted to say no. But as we know in local government, just because you dislike something is no reason necessarily to say no. When it comes to a land use decision, it's got to be based on something other than I just don't like it. My opinion has changed because we have had such tremendous success at the General Assembly getting these revenue tools. And the siting agreement is a particularly powerful revenue tool. We are looking in my county right now at an 800 megawatt, almost 6,000 acre project, and initial siting agreement discussions are around $50 to $60 million on that siting agreement. Keep in mind, our county budget this year was just under $37 million. So on big projects, these siting agreements can be game-changing for a small locality. Of course, not every siting agreement is that large. It depends on the size of your project, but my opinion on solar has shifted with the ability of a locality to extract revenue. When this thing started, frankly, my back was a little up because I said, they're taking all this land and the locality's not getting anything. And that narrative over the past 3 years at the General Assembly has changed, and Robert and I have worked very hard to work with VACO and really lobby hard to get these revenue tools for the locality. So I'm going to go through, if you'll take your 2021 document, and if you all would actually start off on page 5 of this document, because 2020 was the year we really got in the game at the General Assembly, and we had a lot of legislative activity that year, but the highlights on that one were House Bills 1131 and Senate Bill 762, which authorizes a locality by ordinance to assess a revenue share of up to $1,400 per megawatt on a project. I don't know anyone that's not assessing the full $1,400 a megawatt, and that is determined by what they file with PJM, the grid operator. That was a deal that we negotiated, took us about 1.5 years with the solar developers because we were trying to figure out, is there another way other than the very complex machinery and tools tax math to get to a quick and easy numerator on a small to medium-sized project? How do we know what this locality is going to get over the life of the project? Of course, local government, we thought that $1,400 per megawatt could be higher, and it is higher now because we've built in a cost indexing. That was subsequent legislation, but that was one of the game changers in 2020. The other two game changers from the revenue side were if you turn to page 6, the other two bills, the 1434 and the Senate Bill 763. That is where we tackled the exemption that got everybody mad in the first place. When solar was being contemplated, before any of us realized what was coming, the solar developers placed in the taxation section of the code, 58.1, an exemption for solar projects from machinery and tools tax. Most of us in rural areas have a fairly high M&T tax, anywhere from, $1 to $2.50, per 100. Well, the CapEx number, the investment on these solar projects is so large, taxing them on the M&T tax would have probably made them non-viable. So the way, if you use machinery and tools tax to tax a solar project, it is not based on your M&T rate, it's based on your real estate rate. Most of us in Sussex, our rate is 48 cents a hundred right now. So typically rural areas have a very low real estate rate, so you use your M&T formula, but your multiplier is not your M&T rate, but your real estate rate. And then to add insult to injury, they exempted 80% of it totally from taxation. So to my original point, why did I hate solar so much in the beginning? We couldn't get anything for it, basically. Even if you taxed it, you got nothing. So the second bill we did in 2020 was changing that 80% exemption, and we now have a step-down process. After the first 5 years, it steps down to 70% exempt, and 10 years in, it's 60% exempt for all of the years in service. And typically we're talking, depending on the project, 30 to 40 years in service. So we have shaved down basically the penalty on M&T tax. And then the third thing we did in 2020, and this came from your part of the world, I want to give Delegate Keith Hodges full credit on this. The siting agreement concept was Keith's, and he was the patron of that bill. And the original siting agreement legislation had a couple caveats in it. It only applied to projects greater than 5 megawatts, and the locality the project had to be in an opportunity zone. Typically, the low-income areas, and of course there's a map of all the opportunity zones in the state. That captured a lot of projects, but it didn't capture everything. So those were the building blocks 3 years ago. So now if we go back to the first page, we've expanded on all of these revenue tools. So now with the siting agreements, we have, well, I'll start with revenue share first. So on the revenue share at 1,400 a megawatt, now that is indexed at a 10% increase every 5 years. So your 1,400 megawatts at the beginning of the project, it is a much higher number in year 25, year 30, year 40. So our thought process on that, we all know inflation, everything costs more. So we escalated that revenue share if you choose to tax projects that way. We also changed the siting agreement and removed the limitations on the siting agreement. So we took away the limitation to opportunity zones. We expanded it to cover battery storage attached to a project or standalone, and then we later allowed siting agreements for projects, even small projects, under 5 megawatts. So that's, I'm just going to kind of hit the high points, but the bottom line where we are now is from a revenue perspective, these projects are money makers for localities where in their inception they were purely extractive. The bigger the project, the bigger the revenue option. So that was really the most meaningful thing I think that our coalition did, is take to legislators. If the state is mandated, this must be hosted by rural Virginia. Rural Virginia must get something out of it. So that's the good news where we are. Solar can not only pay a landowner, it can absolutely pay a locality. But you need to know how to use the tools. I do have in this packet, and I think it bears looking at, If you go to the host agreements on page 12, and I'm actually really proud to say my county was the first county in Virginia to engage in a siting agreement. We have the first recorded siting agreement in the state. And so the package on that was, and I will promise you, I was trying to find $3,000. Actually, I guess it's slide 12, page 6, I'm sorry. Page 6, slide 12. Our siting agreement was $9,997,000, and I kept saying to the staff, can we please find $3,000 more so I can have a solid $10 million siting agreement? But that was for a 75 megawatt project. So the breakdown is there. We indexed it at 2% every year. We did $4.2 million for broadband deployment. In Sussex, because we prefer the medium to large projects, we value on machinery and tools. We did not adopt revenue share. And now that folks are doing both, we have a little bit of a rule of thumb. If your project is in the 75 to 80 megawatt category, really almost less than 100, you're probably going to make more on revenue share. But what we did, we computed the difference in revenue share and M&T. Revenue share would have brought us $1.7 extra million. We simply built that amount into our siting agreement. And our conversation with the developer was, if you can afford this, we're going to go ahead and fold it into our siting agreement, but not lose the flexibility of taxing bigger projects at the machinery and tools rate, because if you pick revenue share by ordinance, you're stuck with it. 5 megawatts, 500 megawatts. If you go revenue share, you're locked in. I don't want to be locked in, because on a big project, you're absolutely leaving money on the table with revenue share. So we built in the difference in our siting agreement. And one other little trick I've learned, unfortunately, our project, we approved the CUP, and the grid operator ended up killing the project because they put an interconnection cost that was higher than the project could bear. So in essence, PJM killed the project. It was in a great place. I'm still hoping somebody can make something work there. But what we required on the $250,000 cash payment, we put in the conditional use permit that $250,000 cash payment was due within 90 days of the CUP being approved. We got our $250,000 cash, put it towards the fire truck fund, and it was maybe 9-10 months later, the project got killed, but we still got $250,000 up front. Again, the siting agreements are very flexible if you know how to use them. So even though we didn't get a project, we still got $250,000. If you go to the next slide, Richmond County, just down the road, their host agreement, they did an upfront cash payment of $1.65 million. Our upfront cash payment was around $400,000, but we still capitalized on the $250,000 for the fire truck. They did a new EMS facility. They did some trails and parks and rec kind of things. Their total package was 127 megawatts for $9.8 million. King and Queen did one for $19 million on 149 megawatts. And, you know, the beautiful thing about the siting agreement legislation, the way the law is written, you as the locality can accept money from a solar developer, cash for your current operating budget. You can accept cash for your reserve fund. You can accept cash for broadband deployment by name, or you can accept cash for any item that's in your CIP. So we wrote the parameters broad enough to drive a truck through. So basically anything that we might need can be addressed in a siting agreement. So, you know, that has really been, I think, the game changer from a revenue perspective. And then I'm going to finish up with what we did this year, and then probably y'all have a lot of questions, so I'll just open it up for questions. Legislatively, the most important thing we did this year was what we found with COVID when everything kind of ground to a halt, and then with the delays at the grid operator level. PJM basically did a 2-year freeze. There were so many projects coming at them. They had to separate the wheat from the chaff. They were understaffed. So projects basically got lost in a queue. So what we did this year is we had legislation with our House, Senate Bill 1390 and House Bill, I think 1944 is the companion. Any solar project that has been permitted by July 1 of 2023, so this coming July, a board can administratively, by resolution, extend that CUP through July 1 of 2026, basically a 3-year extension without having to go through the whole planning commission, public hearing, the whole process again. We've allowed basically an administrative extension because so many projects that localities have issued CUPs for are still wandering around at the PJM level. And rather than make everybody go through that again, you all as a board can pass a resolution to extend that CUP all the way to 2026 without going through the whole dog and pony show again. The developers were happy about it. I think your planning director and everybody is happy about not having to reinvent the wheel because there's a time holdup out of our control. So that was the most important thing we did this year. The only other legislation I want to point out, and then we can kind of open it up for questions, and Blake and I have talked about this, and this is my advice to localities that are still concerned about solar or don't want solar. There was two budget amendments filed in the House and Senate. In the House, it was filed by a Republican. In the Senate, it was filed by a Democrat. And if you look at the language, in the middle of it, the most compelling piece of this is it would allow the state to have siting authority over solar projects, and it would become a by right exercise. In other words, we would lose our local siting authority. And so when I talk to folks, well, we just don't want solar. I'll go back to what I said earlier. Just because you might not like something isn't necessarily a reason to say no. My fear is if localities don't say yes to well-sited projects, and remember, we have ultimate control over this. I'm afraid now that these budget amendments, it's important. The budget supersedes, as you know, County Administrator, state law. The budget trumps everything. The fact that there was budget language introduced to take away local siting authority for solar should make everybody pay attention. That is very unnerving. So I think I always tell any locality I talk to, be discerning. You have very strong zoning and siting authority under existing law. Develop good ordinances. Think how you want to utilize this in your locality. But don't just keep saying no, because if enough people keep saying no, 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 the General Assembly is going to tell us, fine, you're going to have to live with every project that comes down the pike, and we're going to lose our local authority. So that's always my word of caution. And again, I say that as somebody, when I first got hit in the head with the first project in Sussex, and I felt like I was underwater, you know, don't be afraid of it. Understand it and master it, because if we don't all do that, the state legislature is going to shove it down our throats. I mean, to be blunt, is what my fear is. So that, thankfully, this budget language did not pass. The fact that it was even introduced, and it was introduced by a Republican and a Democrat, ought to make everybody pay attention. So that's sort of the upshot of the 2023 session. The other packet just has more detail on the legislation, and if you all want to talk about bills in particular, or if you just want to open it up for questions, I'm amenable to whatever you all want to do. But that's kind of the picture of the coalition, how we got here, and what we've done to help make localities whole.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right, any board members or any staff members, anybody have any comments or questions?
Yes. Okay, I see where you pulled Richmond County in, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, and then a lot of the other counties you mentioned, the population is not close to Northumberland. Mm-hmm. Northumberland is 12,500, something along in that. I see why you didn't, how about Lancaster and Westmoreland? Did you try them or what?
I've not presented to those counties. I don't know if they have ever approached Robert, but they're, they're similar. And I know that there are, I believe Westmoreland has
15.
a couple projects.
Yeah, a couple at least.
Mm-hmm.
And Lancaster, I don't know about, I know Westmoreland, I don't know about Lancaster.
Lancaster has some too.
And so what I would,
One big one coming.
Yeah.
I would hope they're taking advantage of these revenue tools, certainly. But, and again, that's the reason Chesterfield joined. It's interesting. Weldon Cooper did a study, and Aaron Berryhill at the Department of Energy. Has Aaron come to maybe speak with you all? Or so Aaron, we also work with Aaron. Aaron is often on our calls. So Aaron and Elizabeth Marshall at Weldon Cooper have done a couple different studies. And the thing that broke in Chesterfield was the counties that are in our coalition have monetized solar far better than counties that aren't. In other words, we have the richest siting agreements. They have taken the best advantage of M&T versus revenue share and siting agreements. And Chesterfield said, we don't want to keep leaving money on the table, so even though we're not rural, we want to join because we want to use how to learn how to use the revenue tools. So no, I think Lancaster and Westmoreland might benefit, but I've not spoken to them. So. But again, I hope they're making good use of the tools.
All right.
Well, I'm gonna throw this at you, because it's what I hear from a lot of citizens, is that the Northern Neck is a place to come and visit. A lot of people retire here. They buy waterfront property, expensive homes. Then all of a sudden, you got a solar farm within 100 feet of their home. Has there been any documented proof of
home values?
Yes.
That comes up a lot, and I think on the internet you can find a study anywhere to support one side or the other. Right. The way we approach it in Sussex, and we don't have the water and the vacation home aspect that you guys do, but I think regardless of home values or being a vacation or destination spot, I think one of the most responsible things a locality can do, and this has been one of my kind of pet projects, and I've been on a couple different state work groups with this, and really I'm trying to get a meeting of developers together. We've lived this in Sussex. The most important thing a locality can do and a developer can do and abide by is have good buffers and setbacks. Nobody wants to look at these things. And when you drive 360, there's the project in Hanover. And I say to the developers, are you kidding me? You're going to put up thousands of solar panels and you're going to go to Lowe's and buy a scrawny 3-foot Leland cypress and put 120 up for feet and that's your buffer? No. A lot of times what I'm finding on timbered land, it's really important the landowner communicate, if it's a lease situation, with the developer in the county. If you've got a 200-foot buffer from any road, these things can exist happily out of sight, out of mind. And what we're doing is we're losing so much natural buffering and screening because the timbering is occurring before the permit is issued. The landowners might get a little anxious or greedy and cut all their timber. So what we try to do in Sussex is the developer clearly knows what our buffers are. And we will say, mark your buffers. If the project isn't, is denied by the locality, the landowner can go ahead and finish mowing down that timber and plant pine trees all over again. But until we have approved it, maintain your buffer. Because the screening, I agree with you, nobody wants to, I don't want to look at them. I really don't. I think they're very unattractive. And, in a lot of these areas, Mother Nature has given us standing forest. The problem is there are so many moving parts and pieces that trees get cut way prematurely. We're living that. We are under construction right now in Sussex with a company called Interjex on a 2,600 acre, 118 megawatt project. They bought that project from what I'm going to call a flipper. You get these guys that come in and aggregate the land, and there's Bill and Bob Solar LLC, and they simply do this to sell the project. Well, Interjex bought one of those projects, and in the transition, we had many, many acres of buffer cut. And the modern logging equipment. Those guys come in with feller bunchers and, it's amazing what they can do in a day. I was driving to the courthouse and almost drove my car into the ditch. I'm like, where did my buffer go? I knew where that buffer was. So got on the phone right away with the company. Flash forward a year, I just got the site plan and actually went with the developer to one of my local landscapers. They are replanting, because of our ordinance, 7,411 ball and burlap trees between 10 and 12 feet high at an installed cost of $218 a tree. Y'all do the math on what they're paying for that tree cover being lost. Project construction hasn't started, and we told them as a condition on the permit, the tree buffer gets planted before construction begins. In other words, I don't want our people to look at this stuff. So again, going back to zoning and conditional use, you have a lot of control if you know how to use it. And to this company's credit, they inherited this mess. The original owner told the logger cut it all. He didn't know. Nobody told us. So we've gotten wiser on that. And there's our group has talked to Dominion about this. Tell your contractors, whatever the local buffer is, keep it standing until there's either an approval or a denial. Because I remain convinced if we are smarter about our buffers, your concern, it won't alleviate all of those concerns, but I think it can alleviate a lot of those concerns. And then when you get into a situation, if you've got a project that has some or all open farmland, again, you require a buffer density, and you require the buffer go up before construction starts. And again, they're not bringing in scrawny little 3-foot trees. We are requiring ball and burlap trees, 6 different varieties in 10 and 12 feet height increments. So that's why this is probably going to be one of the world's most expensive buffers, but they've agreed to do it. So it's not an unfounded concern you have, but again, I think everybody's gotten smarter and there is a better way to manage it now. So.
How about managing the people? I mean, you can
Which
have
people?
a lot of people that are not for these projects. And
Yeah, and I've been in your hot
Right.
seat. I mean, we've, like I said, we've approved 3. One of them couldn't be built, unfortunately. That one had no opposition to it at all because of its location. We've denied one, and in the case where we denied one, it was, interestingly enough, we've approved a 200-acre one, a 1,500-acre one, a 2,600-acre one. The one that we denied was 3.7 acres. But why did we deny it? We denied it because it was a small community solar project. It was on a landlocked parcel, and the only way to that parcel was 25 feet off one gentleman's nice brick house's driveway with another house on the other side. And, you know, we could have shrugged our shoulders and said, well, it's only, but the impact on those two households was so profound that I said, no, we're not going to do this. And, you know, there was some concern about the developer maybe taking us to court on that one. And I said, well, you know, the picture of the entrance feet off this gentleman's driveway, I said, you know what, I'm comfortable. I'll take this photograph to any judge in Virginia. I'm comfortable. And they didn't come after us. You know, and in that case, we did listen to those folks' concerns. You had two people that were going to be profoundly impacted, and there was a trailer park kind of through the woods. So while visually they would have been screened, they would have been very impacted during construction. And the other, you know, there's so many things to consider when you say yes or no. The other big detractor on this one is it was on Highway 40. We have a lot of log trucks, a lot of heavy trucks, a lot of trucks using that to get to 95. And we wanted a floating exit to the property because there are so many crashes on that road with people rear-ending log trucks, et cetera. There physically was not the room for the kind of entrance that we felt was necessary. So again, it was purely a land use decision. I think when you're trying to balance what people say, I'm a big believer in property rights. You know, I think as long as it's not a prohibited use of property, you don't want to abridge somebody's property rights. You know, there's the balance on the other hand. You've got construction impacts and you've got view shed issues. And you know, I know there's lots of discussion about the safety of the solar panels and, you know, but really at the end of the day, what are the impacts to locale, to residents, construction traffic, and view shed? And again, if you're wise in your zoning and you really ride herd on buffers, a lot of view shed issues can be mitigated. If you're smart, you know, you require a traffic study, you require a traffic plan, you require a road bond, so any road damage is repaired during the project. Again, all tools in your use permit, you can mitigate the folks that complain, because again, if you got the right project, a lot of those people that are complaining, if you ask them separate and apart, would you like a new fire and EMS building? Would you like 2 new ambulances for the county? Would you like additional parks and recreation in the county? They'd probably say yes to all those things, but don't raise my taxes to do it. So again, with the revenue tools, I think there's a way to manage the concerns. I mean, you know, and you really have to drill down to what is the opposition. Is it, I don't understand it and I'm afraid of it? Is it, I don't want to look at it? Is it, I'm mad because my neighbor's getting rich and I'm just across the line and I didn't get cut in on this deal? And I will tell you, that comes up a lot. So I think when it comes to managing residents' opposition, drill down into what their opposition is. But again, I will say, from my point of view, and the project I referenced earlier, the 800 megawatt, you know, 6,000 acres, there's a lot of opposition to that project. But when I sat down with some of the landowners and I said, look, the county could get on a $50 million siting agreement 2 new fire and EMS stations. We can go to, even with our low real estate rate, ag land use taxation for the farmers. All of this stuff that we could do with this kind of money, instead of being opposed, they're working with the developer to see if they can get a new footprint, that they could live with the project and it could still go forward. So I think the revenue tool is a powerful answer to that if people understand it. So that's how we've dealt with it in our county.
Do you see any activity by cooperatives in the solar field?
Sure. As a matter of fact, our project that didn't get built was for Prince George Electric Co-op, and we were very excited because we all love our co-ops. I mean, I'm a big fan of our local co-op, and we've worked extensively with them on broadband rollout and all of this. So this was actually going to be a self-generator for the co-op system, and financially, it's just not viable right now. But typically, the co-ops are doing the smaller projects, and a lot of them are what are called behind the meter. In other words, they are not going to the grid for use all over the grid. They are for use within the co-op system from substation to substation, and those are typically 5 megawatts or less. So we haven't had, there's a co-op project going in on the Greensville-Sussex line that I think is going to spill a little into Sussex. But yeah, those are behind the meter, and they are for use within the co-op system.
2/3 of Northumberland County is Northern Neck Electric. Dominion only has a third.
Yeah.
The main roads, of course. And every project that's been proposed has been less than 5 megawatts.
Right, for the co-op system.
And there was somebody stated that when it's less than 5 megawatts, you've got different ways of siting agreement versus something else, I forgot.
No, that's not true, and that's what we've been working in the General
Well,
Assembly.
that's what we were being explained. It was that if the 5 megawatt was the break, about which type of agreement you use for.
Siting agreement applies to all, and you either have to choose revenue share or M&T taxation. On a small project, I would absolutely do revenue share, without question. It's easy math, and you're simply not going to have the volume to make your money on M&T. But a siting agreement applies. Now, the issue with siting agreements and co-ops, you know, financially, they're different from Dominion and APCO and all the big investor-owned utilities. So, you know, the co-ops basically have to be a member-owned, revenue-neutral kind of situation. So the siting agreements, I don't think, can be particularly rich for the co-ops just because of the way financially they're managed versus the big investor-owned utilities.
But you can still have the same controversies regardless of who.
Sure. Yeah, what we found in Sussex, at least up our way, most of our folks are more sympathetic towards the co-op. Like I said, Prince George does a very good job of outreach in our area, so everybody loves the co-op. So co-op, you know, a co-op project, at least in our county, received really no pushback, whereas some of the others for Dominion have received more. But, you know, the one thing I would say, the biggest thing on co-op projects is decommissioning still applies. And you would use the same decommissioning template for a co-op that you would use for Dominion or any other project.
There's a law that's coming in effect, 2024, whatever, where about they look at farmland, prime farmland and trees. Are you seeing any enhanced projects to get under that timeline?
No. It's interesting because I served on the House Bill 206 Farm and Forest Land Mitigation, and in full disclosure, I think I mentioned earlier, my family is in the hardwood sawmill business, so as Mr. Clark knows. So the tree loss is of selfishly personal concern to me. And I think we are looking at now the latest number, you know, the number keeps growing, but I think we're looking at somewhere around at full build-out of 16,000 megawatts, 350,000 acres potentially lost to solar deployment. That's an enormous number, and that's going to impact farm and forestry for sure. You know, one thing we did in our zoning, and I don't know how many of these you would have in your locality. We have a few, but we give preference in our zoning to old industrial sites. We have an old titanium mine on the Sussex-Dinwiddie end of the county, and we have a developer that's getting together an application for that site. All the minerals have been mined, so we're very excited about that site. It's not disturbing a tree or a cultivated farm field. This is all old mineral land. The challenge on that site is the stability of the ground because it's been mined. If they use surface-mounted panels with the concrete piers versus going in the ground, and I think they're still trying to do their studies on what's going to be viable. Surface mounts add cost to the project. But in your zoning, you can give preference to sites, or certainly in your comp plan. We do address farm and forest land in our comp plan and give preference to old industrial sites. You know, there are ways that it can be mitigated. It's interesting, there's a project going on in Dinwiddie right now where they're utilizing 40 acres of open farmland, but in the same general area footprint, they are going to take some very low quality kind of mixed timber stands, a lot of plantation pine, and they're actually going to recreate 60 acres of farmland for the same farmer to farm lease-free. So that's one project that is really going to be sort of the first poster child of how do we remediate farmland loss. And while we're losing some timberland, you know, me being in the tree business, not all trees are created the same. So, you know, there is certainly a value and a quality to stands of trees versus others. I know that the Department of Forestry has an overlay on your GIS system where they have identified what they call high-value forest, where you're going to have, you know, a lot of hardwood, which there's a lot of hardwood over here, you know, quality, et cetera. And again, in your comp plan and zoning, you can say, you know, it's going to go against a project if we're going to disturb any high-value forest, if we're going to disturb, you know, X amount of farmland, because we do know we've got to eat in 30 years from now. We've got to graze cattle and grow corn and all that stuff. So, you know, you can dial into that in your zoning and comp plan. But that project is interesting. Some of the other things they're doing, I had a meeting with Farm Bureau in Richmond. You've probably heard about the solar sheep.
Yep.
Well, that's real. Dominion's actually doing it. And what it's allowing some sheep farmers to do is they can actually increase their herd, but don't have to acquire additional pasture land because they're turning them loose on the solar projects and getting that economic benefit. There's a whole big push going on with the pollinators, you know, growing the right plants. So the notion of, I think they call it, like, what's the word? Solar voltaic agriculture, or, but anyway, trying to marry the two. So I think there are some possibilities where it may not necessarily be as extractive or harmful as initially thought. And so it's really exciting to see some of these things being done. And, you know, but again, it's up to your locality. What is most important to you? And again, as long as the state doesn't take away our zoning authority, you chart your own destiny on this thing, you know, and you decide what you want and potentially how much you want and what do you want your projects to look like.
Does the regional Power Group, PGM,
PJM,
do they get involved in small projects, or do they have a certain size that they will decide to let in or not, like the one that got denied?
On the shared and community solar, the less than 5 megawatt, PJM does not, those projects don't have to go through the queue process that utility scale solar does. Because really what you're talking about is literally kind of space on the grid. So the big PJM issue comes with big projects on the 500, 150, and 115 kV lines. And, you know, is there flow on the line for this project in this space versus this space? For the co-ops, because it's not going to the grid at all, if it's going from one of their substations to another behind the meter, PJM has nothing to do with that. On the community solar, I'm a little fuzzy on it because we really haven't seen a lot of it roll out. Dominion is mandated to have a certain amount of it. And I'm not sure if they have any PJM interaction on that, because anything less than 20 megawatts isn't going to go directly up to the grid. Anything, you know, the 5 megawatt and less projects, they can be handled on 3-phase lines. You don't even need a transmission line. So you only get PJM involved when you're on those big transmission lines.
As far as the buffers, what kind of width do y'all have in your county as far as off the property line or off the highway?
Right. And I didn't bring a copy of my zoning with me, but
We'll get one
believe.
somehow.
Yeah, I can send it to you, but we do from any primary or secondary road, leave, it's 75 feet, but we changed it, and we might have gone to 150 feet. I think we've doubled it. We have 350 feet minimum from any dwelling or business. And on the big 2,600 acre Waverly project, we had language in there, or greater, increased or decreased. In other words, when we had contact with the town of Waverly, the buffers in those areas, we literally went on site and stood there and looked. We had a public housing project, and we determined there, you know what, let's go ahead and make this buffer 500 feet here. And you know, we literally put on our boots and we walked it. And I think that's the other advice I would give you all, and it's worked really well in my county. And of course, my board has kind of relegated it to me. They're like, Susan, you're the solar person, you handle it, okay, fine. But whenever we get approached by any developer, large or small, I've done this now 4 times, the county administrator and the planning director, myself, and anybody else, any other supervisor that wants to come.
Don't get 3 or more though.
Yeah, right. I mean, we have to keep our two or less. But if me plus whoever's district it's in, we actually go to the field or the woods and stand there. We don't meet them in the office the first time. Tell us where you want to put this thing. We'll meet you there. And there was one project along the side of 301, and I looked at the developer. I said, nope, we got houses there, we got houses there. This is a busy road. This is never going to fly. Pack your stuff and go home. And they did. They said, okay, thanks for telling us. What I've found is they appreciate that input early. And the only way you can really assess it, a map on a piece of paper is no good. I tell my supervisors, y'all, I know it's a Saturday and I know we're all busy. Just get in your truck and drive it. Just go. And so I physically see everything that comes to the county. And on the big project that's under consideration right now, I've done 2 different trips. And on the first trip, I was there 2.5 hours. And on the second trip, I was there 3 hours. And I put on my boots and I walked with the developer. I said, let's go. We drove the back roads, we got out of the truck, we walked it. What you never want to do is be sitting in that chair taking a vote and y'all have never seen the project.
Right.
Don't ever.
Right.
That is the worst thing you can do.
We look at every project
And
regardless of the type.
you'd be surprised the
Right.
localities that don't do that. And I always say, y'all, that's a bad move. Because, you know, to your point earlier, we need to see what the aggrieved citizens are gonna see. So I'll put on my supervisor hat and leave the coalition. As an elected official, I need to look at that project through the same lens the person next door is looking at it through. Is there a way to make this work? Is there a way to make this palatable for you, or is this never gonna fly? And I think, you know, you gain credibility if you dive in, and it takes time and it takes work, but what I've learned is I always feel better about myself. A yes vote or a no vote, I feel like I've examined every angle. And I think really for something that can be this impactful, you really need to take that time to do it. I just think that's the easiest way.
As far as fencing, most of it's chain link fence. Have you seen any alternative fences?
You know, it's interesting. I was at a meet, where was I? I was at a meeting in Williamsburg last week. Evidently, I still call it Game and Inland Fisheries, but Department of Wildlife Resources, evidently they're making noises about the razor wire at the top. And they're saying that deer are some getting caught up in this razor wire. And, you know, I think our fence height is a 6-foot chain link with the razor wire on top. But what somebody brought up at that meeting, the federal regulators determine the fencing. I mean, we can put it in our zoning, but ultimately, because there's high voltage equipment, FERC really is the ultimate say on how this thing has to be fenced, because you've got voltage that is dangerous. But I think the standard is really what the industry standard, as somebody from Dominion said, we have to do it this way, because FERC tells us we have to do it
We
this
had
way.
one suggested game fencing,
Yeah, no.
and then they were going to use salt-treated posts as opposed to posts.
And a developer suggested that?
Yep.
That's very interesting, because when you talk to
It was all of ours been community
Yeah,
solar, but still,
okay.
it was different from anything else I had seen.
Yeah, I'd do a little more research on that, and I'd talk to the developer, because it was really made clear to us by Dominion that the feds, because of the voltage. Now, the voltage could be different on these smaller projects, but on an industrial scale, it's incumbent on us and on the developer to keep people away from that kind of power, so.
All I can think right now.
What do you think right now? Well, we've had issues with grass, not wanting to cut it, you know, cut it once or twice a year. And, you know, dry grass is a fire hazard. We've thought about keeping it cut to a maximum height of 8 inches.
And did you address all that in your conditional use permit? Because that's where you should do that, yeah.
So, I know even at 8 inches in the winter, it's gonna be dry, still a fire hazard, but it's a lot better than being 2 foot tall. And we've even heard that there was a
It was a fire retardant grass.
fire retardant grass.
Interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. I've never heard of it before.
Me either. But you know, again, that conditional use permit is your hammer. It is your guide. It is what they agree to when they do a project. So, you know, again, the ball is in your court on the enforcement of that. And so I would say you all decide what you're comfortable with. It goes in the cup, and those are the rules of the game.
I got another question, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
A lot of these plans they present right here, these, obviously, they're presenting this as da-da-da-da-da. We don't have the staff, the expertise to evaluate this. How is that going to be?
So that you've touched on a really good point. So A lot of counties, there are a couple firms that do this kind of solar consulting that can evaluate these permits for you, can make, can help with the CUP conditions, can help write the CUP if your staff, we've got 2 people in our planning department. So, you know, I think most of our rural counties have 2 or 3 people. You can make it, you can require the applicant to pay for that.
Up front? Before it even gets to the CUP piece?
Yeah, you can, as a condition of the condition, you can say to them, look, we don't have the staff to evaluate this. We are gonna hire X, and it's gonna cost Y. And that's the only way we can really even process this application. Most developers understand that we don't have the manpower. If they want the project badly enough, they'll go, okay, yeah, that's fine.
I mean, that is part of the built-in application fee? Or is that if it's
You can
approved-
address it, you can, I'm trying to remember which county has put it in their application fee.
You can let
Is it
Mr.
Halifax,
You can let Ms. Tadlock know that. You
Yeah.
can remember it and find it.
It might be Halifax, I can check with Scott Simpson, but yes. So what you can do to cover an outside, you make your application fee that high. Some of them will say, fine, we'll pony it up front. You know, that piece is not really prescribed by law, so that's a little bit the wild, wild west, whatever everybody's comfortable with. A lot of people use the Berkeley Group. We've used the Berkeley Group on helping our planning staff with that.
But there wasn't any problem if it was gonna be approved as part of a siting agreement or anything like that?
Well, the siting agreement is
Oh,
separate
the
and apart
CUP,
from
the
that.
The CUP, like you paying for fire and rescue and all like that?
Yeah. Well, the siting agreement is where all of that goes. The CUP, you don't want to throw really that into the CUP. The CUP really speaks more to the conditions of what they must agree to relative to the site. And the financial side of it is where you tackle the siting agreement. That's what that's designed to do. You know, interestingly, the law reads on the siting agreement, it says that the applicant shall, and it doesn't say may, it says shall in 15.220, I can't remember the codes, but anyway, 15.228 something where the siting agreement is, it says that the applicant shall meet with the county to discuss a siting agreement once they've made their intention clear. And really what most folks are doing is they're kind of running it on parallel tracks. And that code section closes out by saying not reaching agreement cannot be the sole reason that you deny a project, but it can figure into the, so bottom line, I want to give, again, Keith Hodges all the credit in the world. The way that siting agreement language is written, it really behooves the developer to play ball with the locality. It really behooves them to say, we want to come here, we're going to disturb X amount of land, and for your trouble, we're going to offer up blank, 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 blank. And, you know, interestingly enough, a lot of developers are saying to a locality, look, where are your holes? What do you need? Our project in Waverly, and some developers, and this is, you know, I've got a list of good and bad actors that I'll never say publicly, but if anybody ever wants to call me for a private conversation, I've seen them all. But on our project in Waverly, that project was permitted, got the CUP before the siting agreement legislation. They were just about, that CUP was just about to expire when it was acquired by the new folks. So they didn't have to do a siting agreement at all, but we needed new concrete floors, and we had a lot of construction at our animal shelter. They gave us a $70,000 check for our animal shelter. And it turns out a lot of the folks with this company are big animal lovers, and Not only did they give us the big check, and they came and spent the day at the shelter, they came and helped us clean up, they came and walked dogs, and they gave us $70,000 because they wanted to do something. Now, they didn't have to. Not all companies are like that. There's nothing that, and the law also says, even if it's a project that doesn't qualify for a siting agreement, you can go back and ask them. I think Halifax has had good luck with older projects ponying up after the fact. You know, their county administrator is great. He's like, I'm going to ask all of them. They can say no and slam the door in my face, but I'm sure going to ask. And they've actually, Scott has had some companies offer up even though they weren't legally obligated. So, you know, I think they're figuring out that time is getting short, land is getting scarcer, and they need to play ball. So I think you're seeing more developers want to engage in what can we do for the community.
Now, when you would read the code section as far as meeting implies face-to-face
Yes.
as opposed to sending an email, here is the attached citing agreement.
It doesn't specify in person.
That's
We
what I
always-
view as a meeting.
Yeah, we, you know, and again, y'all are kind of rural and isolated. I think, you know, COVID taught us a lot of things, how to run meetings over Zoom. You know, we do ours face-to-face, but the law is, it says shall meet. So whether that's a conference call or a Zoom call or sitting across a table, it does not specify that. You can probably manage that any way you want. But.
In worst case, if the General Assembly, in their infinite wisdom, and I say that very facetiously, decided to take over the control, one is Department of Energy going to have sufficient staff to review all this, sufficient expertise to
No.
view it. And then what's going to happen to all the liabilities and revenues lost localities present right now?
I think it would be a complete train wreck, and the answer to your question is DOE has no more staff to manage it than DEQ has E&S guys to handle their end of the deal. General Assembly before last, DEQ got funding in the state budget, and they added either 4 or 6 stormwater guys to help review the site plans, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, you know, and this is really important for y'all here being so flat and close to the bay, the E&S rules have changed. You know, these things were ridiculously, and I'm not an engineer, but ridiculously, these things were treated as pervious surfaces for the computation of stormwater, which, you know, any fifth grader could have said, we've got a glass parking lot here, guys, and we're creating enormous runoff, but.
Plus the angle of the.
Yeah, so, anyway, those rules changed really as soon as Mike Rolban, the new DEQ director, came in. And, excuse me, I think what, hopefully what we'll see is better and more thoughtful site plan designs. You know, you're gonna see more stormwater retention ponds, more, you know, better spaced, because you're going to have to, because that water has to go somewhere. They are doing interesting things with the panels, and I think this was on one of our Dominion calls. When the, you know, they track to follow the sun, and the angle moves to capitalize on the rays, et cetera. But when a rainstorm is coming, regardless of time of day, instead of the panels being flat, they go vertical, so the rainwater can fall to the ground and be absorbed, not the big pancake dish that just sends it everywhere. So I think the technology, hopefully with the site plan design and the technology, the stormwater bit will improve, because that's where the developers are taking it on the chin. And I think, I just read something within the past month, something like 70 or approaching 70% of solar projects in Virginia have all had at least one E&S violation. I mean, it's a problem, and I think they all know they've got to fix this problem. And I was at a meeting when the new DEQ director said, I'm making these rules because I'm sick of these developers sending in these half-baked plans just to get the local approval, and they're making a mess. So he really has sent the message to the development community, tighten up your engineering, don't send me a half-baked plan, you send me your best plan when you send it in, because otherwise I'm going to start fining you guys. And I think the one in Louisa County, Dominion paid I think approaching a six-figure fine on the one in Louisa. I mean, DEQ's not playing around anymore, so the developers are starting to pay attention to this because they're really getting hit with some pretty steep fines.
Well, if the technology is, when it's a storm coming and they can go from whatever angle to vertical, I hope their technology is more accurate than our weather people have.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's, again, it's this whole thing. I feel like it's not quite as a wild, wild west as it used to be, but there's still a lot of unknown. And I mean, when I'm like you sitting there making decisions for our citizens, there's the here and now, which we have a little better handle on, but then there's the decision, as I tell everybody, when these projects might be sunsetted, although there's a lot of thought that given the desire for green energy, et cetera, in 35 or 40 years, I think a lot of people are thinking these projects will be re-upped instead of returned to their original purpose. But as I say, people, look, when this first one comes off, online and offline in Sussex, I'm going to be in heaven, hell, or a nursing home. I don't know which one it's going to be, but it's going to be 30 years from now, and I'm going to be 86 years old. So, if I'm still here. So to me, the important decision, there's the important decision today, but there's the important decision that you're leaving to somebody 30 to 40 years from now, and that's where your decommissioning has to be extremely well spelled out. And the advice I have given to people that are, I've had a lot of folks at home that have either farm or forest land, and they're like, well, should I lease this land, or should I sell it, or what should I do? And what I always tell them is, if you really love your land, don't do any. And I don't want Blake to throw something at me here, but if you're going to lease your land, you really need to make sure your contract with that developer is clearly spelled out. Because again, the end of life on these things is the Wild Wild West. There has never been a utility scale solar site decommissioned east of the Mississippi that I'm aware of. So the first one that happens is going to be the first one, and we don't know. But the landowner needs to make sure if they're leasing their land, they're protected, because what I always say, I'm not going to be on the board in 30 or 40 years, but whoever is, if the developer can't close this thing out and doesn't have the money, we're coming after the landowner next. So this, don't let your grandchildren buy a yacht and be partying it up, somewhere in the Bahamas, because we're going to find them. Don't spend all the money. That's the part that I think everybody needs to be careful of.
That's what
is your
concerns me the
decommission.
most, is the decommissioning, and you've got situations where, landowner themselves may be, as you said, in heaven, hell, or the nursing home.
Heaven, hell, or
themselves.
nursing home, and the grandchildren have spent all the money, and here you go. So, the one thing I would say, the company we're doing our big project with, the big problem with decommissioning, as I see it, you're going to have two problems. There are, on a big project, probably millions of yards of steel and concrete in the ground. Pull a number out of the sky. If it costs $100 million to build something and put all that junk in the ground, you're going to have to pay in 40 years your dozer operator and your excavator operator, God knows what an hour. It's going to cost at least as much to take it out of the ground in 40 years as it did to put it in. And don't ever let them give you the line, we're gonna take everything out of the ground 3 feet or higher, and we're gonna leave the rest of it in the ground.
Keep the wires in the ground.
Yeah,
Yeah.
don't, I mean,
We've heard that.
a lot of
Heard that
people have
before.
fallen for that. Don't do it, I'm just telling you, don't do it. So we require everything to come out regardless of depth, and it's in the cup. But that's gonna cost money at decommissioning. And that's the reason they wanna leave all that crap in the ground, excuse my French. It cost a lot to put it in, it's gonna cost a lot to take it out. So as I see it, you've got 2 problems at the end of life. Returning the soil. The other thing, Mecklenburg County, who's one of our members, learned this very hard lesson. In your cup, require all topsoil to be stored on site. They had a huge project in Mecklenburg. All the topsoil got removed, ended up in a dirt pit 1 county over. The guy's making a fortune on selling the topsoil, and they've got a mess. There's no topsoil on site. Keep your topsoil on site as a requirement in the cup. Don't let them haul it away. Don't let them sell it, because you're going to need it. So I think at the end of life, you've got the ground restoration, and you've got the solar panel removal. There are literally going to be millions, not thousands or hundreds, millions of solar panels in Virginia that have to go somewhere. Most landfills, a lot of landfills aren't permitted to take them. A lot of them don't want to take them because they're big. They're going to fill up. So one thing that you can do in your cup, I know there are several companies. We actually have an emerging solar panel construction industry in this country. So the notion of the fear of the Chinese panels, you can specify in your cup, I want American-made panels. The biggest manufacturer in the United States is First Solar, and I think they're in Ohio, maybe? Somewhere in the Midwest, Ohio, Indiana. They have their own recycling program because these things can be recycled. They're expensive. They can take them apart. They can use them. So they have their own collection program where you use their panels, they stay responsible for the panels. At end of life, they come get them and recycle them. If one goes bad in the life of the project, you tell them, they get the panel, they recycle the panel. So I think from the locality's point of view, those are the 2 things that you've got to make sure you're protected from at end of life, no question. So the way most people do it is they require a financial assurance mechanism, some sort of surety, either a bond, an insurance policy. A couple of our counties require cash in escrow. A lot of people balk at that because that can be a lot of money depending on the size of the project. And then every decommissioning plan I've seen, every 5 years that decommissioning amount is revisited to make sure your decommissioning amounts are accurate. Most of those plans write in a third party coming in to evaluate at the applicant's expense. I've never known anybody not to agree with it. I think they've kind of accepted that that's the way this is going to go now, that people are wising up. One issue with Dominion is they want to use what they call their parent guarantee. Dominion is, or as I've heard, can be, and in our case, I'm trying to remember how we handled it. It's a small project. We required the initial applicant to bond. So on our Dominion project, Dominion inherited the bonding requirements on their project. Sometimes if they acquire a project, they're going to honor in whatever decommissioning requirement they've inherited. But Dominion is getting more into building and developing, or developing and building their own projects. You know, before it was everybody else do it for us and we'll buy them. They're doing their own self-development now, and in those projects, they want to use what they call their parent guarantee. In other words, Big Bad Dominion has billions in the bank. We're not going to bond anything up front. We're not going to give you any money. We're fine. I will quote Wayne Carter, who is Mecklenburg's county administrator, and Wayne is a great guy, and Wayne looked at him one day and said, well, you know, even GM went broke. In other words, in 30, 40 years, when Dominion has to make all these things whole, even Mighty Dominion, is their parent guarantee going to be enough? So on a Dominion project, I have heard that the decommissioning discussions have gotten very interesting because they don't want to front the money. They're saying, trust us, we're Dominion. And that may be okay. You know, to Wayne's point, it may not. So I think the end-of-life discussion and decisions are honestly more than the what's happening now is what keeps me up at night sitting in your seat.
What are you seeing as far as off-site storage for electricity? It's not on the applicant property, but
Yeah,
say
standalone battery storage.
standalone. How is that being addressed?
So,
and regulated?
so I can say Sussex, again, we were the first locality in Virginia to approve a standalone storage facility. We've got about 20 megawatts of storage, and I'm assuming y'all know what they look like. Basically, they're giant lithium-ion batteries about the size of a trailer on a tractor trailer. They're on a concrete pad. We approved ours, frankly, because it was in the middle of nowhere, literally in the middle of nowhere. We did not have a single well. We had no residents. It's near a substation in Stony Creek. Frankly, the primary reason we approved it, it was 2 years before the law changed that exempted solar facilities, but the taxation piece, 58-136-62, I believe it is, it was murky on battery storage. So they agreed to pay full machinery and tools on that tiny little battery storage. And I said, hey kids, this is in the middle of nowhere. We'll be a guinea pig and we're gonna ride this pony all the way to the bank. So I'm trying to remember how many millions we're getting for this battery storage in the middle of nowhere. So we kind of agreed to be the crash test dummy on that. The law's now changed, so it's treated the same as the solar facilities. I can tell you the location and the taxation were the only reasons we approved it. And so we were kind of the test case on, I think we have on that project over 100 conditions on it. It's heavily conditioned, and it's heavily conditioned because of fire and EMS. In other words, and the technology on them is changing, but there was a very, very bad battery fire on a solar facility outside of Tucson, Arizona. I think it was Tucson. The battery started to overheat. The developer had not communicated at all with their local fire and EMS. So they had a fire, but it was self-contained in the unit. The firemen saw the smoke. They got into the facility. They opened the door to the big battery container, and it went from a fire to an explosion, and 6 of the 8 firefighters were rushed to the hospital, and I think 2 or 3 of them had like first and second degree. It was a mess. It was a holy mess. So that was the wake-up call on battery storage. That so in our case, Dominion does training with our volunteer fire departments once a year. In the cup, any special firefighting foams, anything over and above what takes to fight one of these fires, they pay for, they stock. Yearly training is required, and basically the technology has really changed. And what Dominion will tell you, they've had a fire at their Greensville, the Sadler Solar Project on the race car brothers, Hermie and Elliott Sadler. They have a 80 megawatt project with Dominion. They actually had a fire down there, and that was one of our calls that Dominion and Greensville County EMS debriefed with our coalition. So basically, if there's a fire at a solar facility now, if it's behind the fence, they say, let it burn. Your local volunteer firefighters are responsible for anything outside the fence to keep a forest fire or brush fire from occurring. But the way these systems are designed now, particularly the battery storage and the inverters that collect the juice, they're designing them to basically self-contain the fire, try to snuff itself out. Dominion comes, or the developer has their own deal, and you're locally required for everything outside the fence. So in other words, if it's burning, we'll let it roll. Don't touch it. And that's exactly what happened in the Greensville case. So one of the issues that's happening, and this was the problem at Greensville, the inverters, so at the end of every row of solar panels, there is getting to be an inverter that's about the size of a laptop computer. In older facilities, the design was to have an inverter the size of a Greyhound bus that would collect the juice from hundreds of panels. Those things are extremely fire prone because they're collecting so much juice. So the design of these facilities is changing and evolving. So now what you have is a lot of little inverters feeding the big collector rather than hundreds of panels on 10 or 20 great big inverters, because they've realized that is creating a fire hazard. So the design of the facilities is changing to where fires would be more localized. So in other words, if an inverter catches fire, the inverter has caught fire for this row of panels, instead of an inverter that's aggregating hundreds of panels. So again, this whole thing is just a learning process. I mean, they're redesigning these things every day to deal with stormwater, to deal with fire, to deal with, you can't, our little planning departments cannot master all this. So that's why bringing in an outside reviewer is helpful. But I think the industry has realized, I think that fire in Greensville was a wake-up call for Dominion. I mean, it was kind of a big deal in that the fire wasn't bad, but the reality is this can happen. And, the industry would say it's safe as a kitten, safe as a kitten. Well, at the end of the day, guys, you're aggregating a whole lot of juice. So there's going to be an inherent risk here. And so I think, again, the industry, you don't really know what your pitfalls are till you roll it out, till you're living it, doing it. And so I think they are becoming more responsive, and I think the biggest thing you're seeing relative to safety is site design. How can we make the inverters less dangerous? The answer is more inverters, smaller inverters, the collector, are there multiple sort of collectors? And so, they're learning as they go. I will say, I think the industry has been responsive. I think DEQ finding them on stormwater was a good wake-up call. I'm very glad Mike has done that and really gotten their attention. And I think the Greensville fire was a wake-up call to localities and to the developers. The firefighters have to know what to do, and it's going to be incumbent on us to actually do what the CUP requires us to do. So the SEC, within the past 2 weeks, has given the go-ahead on our battery storage project. So we should see construction begin on that probably in early 24, I think, is what their schedule is. So I'll be off the board when it happens, but I will be monitoring it closely because I'm very interested in it. But in talking with Dominion, there are going to have to be a lot of battery storage, if not standalone, attached to projects. Because at the end of the day, back to the problem with the grid as we have it today was not really designed to sort of modulate the power. It was designed to take coal-fired and nuclear and then more natural gas baseload power, where what's running on those lines doesn't change. And solar really messes with that, which is why the battery storage is so important. because it can kind of modulate, you know, that load to the grid. One of the things is, I think, at least the general public has a notion that battery storage is going to allow these facilities to store sunshine that shine this week and store it for next week. Not true. The best battery storage out there right now can hold about 6 hours of juice. You know, that's what they can hold. So this concept that we're storing last week's sunshine to use next month, that is not true. And I think the public may have a false impression of battery storage. But, you know, the big pitfalls on that, again, are fire and any leakage, because right now they're all lithium ion, which if there were a rupture, you could have groundwater and soil contamination. So again, when you cite battery storage, I would be very cautious of any private wells or public reservoirs or public groundwater, because in a catastrophic case, you could have contamination. And that's, again, what made our site so desirable, in that it was utterly isolated, no water around. I mean, it was kind of a poster child for a good site. But the problem is they're going to have to fit battery storage, I think, ultimately in places where, from a ground point of view, it may not be the best dirt to put them on, but it's going to have to be figured out. If we continue to go the renewable way, you're going to have to store this juice. It's going to have to be stored. So I'll let you know in a couple of years how our battery storage is going. But again, we did capitalize on the taxation. And I think the SEC hearing examiner recommended not approving our project because of the cost, because of the taxation. And Dominion, the commission can override a hearing examiner, and the commission went ahead and approved it despite the cost. But you know, the bottom line is the battery storage is going to be located close to a substation. It has to be. So again, if you're looking from a county point of view, how do I map out where my hot zones are? Find your substations, because that's really where any battery storage is going to go, almost immediately adjacent to, because it's going to store it and then send it to the substation to send it up so that's physically where it's going to go.
Do you know if any of this modulation in power from solar has any impact on the other lines? Electric lines?
That I don't know.
Because if they're used to one relatively constant, then all of a sudden, is that going to increase possibilities of line failures?
Yeah, you know, and again, I'm going to put on my sawmill girl hat now. You know, the worst thing, if you're running equipment, the worst thing you can have is an interruption. You know, sawmills are electric. So we've got saws and belts just going and going. The worst thing that can happen to us is a slowdown in the juice. That's when people get hurt. That's when people lose fingers. That's when things happen. That's when things fly off. So, you know, I think that is a concern, and that's why you keep hearing at the federal level about the Grid Modernization Act. And I think people way, way smarter than me that are electrical engineers realize we might be, you know, we've gone down a renewable road long before the grid is ready to handle it. And you know, you can get rolling brownouts and blackouts because you don't have enough juice. You can also get brownouts and blackouts because you've got intermittent juice or too much juice, and it goes bzzz. So what are we in for with that? I don't know. I think that's going to be the Wild Wild West. But I'm not smart enough to tackle that one. Somebody smarter than me is going to have to deal with that one. But I do think it's a possibility. And that worries me. And I think it worries a lot of heavy manufacturers, you know, from an equipment point of view. It's a bigger question than you all approving or not approving a project. I think there are grid issues bigger than any of us that if we keep flooding renewables, you know, the grid's got to be updated to handle it, because I think, you know, there could be some disruptions, and that's worrisome.
That's all I got, Mr. Chairman.
All right, if I was a solar developer, came to your county, had a plan that I wanted to present, how long before you would know about it?
You know, it's interesting. I think the word has gotten out that there's this crazy lady in Sussex, so you better let her know what you're doing before you start cutting down all your trees and put all your land together. But, you know, that is back to the buffering question earlier. I think that's one of the problems in the state work group on the farm and forest land mitigation. I was in the local government work group, and I said, you know, the problem here, guys, is the locality is always the last to know. You know, the developer and the landowners have all gotten together, and it gets out in the community, but from a formal action point of view, we're always the last to know, which is why, you know, to the extent you can tell developers that approach you, you know, put the word out, guys. Just come to us early. Don't come to us, you know, if they come to you with a ready-to-go application, you know, that's just, I think, a waste of everybody's time. And again, I think that the folks are getting smarter about pre-application meetings, about coming to planning offices, and but I still think that could be better. I think that could be better, because again, you've got folks making plans, but we're the ones who have to approve the plans. Well, the best laid plans of mice and men, it doesn't work without us going, it's okay. And so I would love to see better communication between landowners, developers, and the locality. And again, from the landowner's point of view, I can see why if somebody came to me with a solar project, I'd be like, you know, I'm going to get paid, and I know people aren't going to like it, so I better keep my mouth shut. You know, I think what we're all going to learn in 4 or 5 years is the better the communication, the better projects you're going to get in better sites with less disruption and less buffer mode down. I think communication is the key. So in Sussex, we've worked really hard with the development community. If I've had lunch once at the Virginia Diner with a solar developer, I've literally had lunch 30 times. Because they come to us before there's even an official pre-application meeting. You know, we want to do this here. Here's the GIS map. This is the land. Okay, and I put on my old lady glasses. All right, this road is here, and so lives here. And, you know, I mean, I have had so many of those lunches, and I think you can sort of establish your own practice internally of, you know, don't show up at the planning office with this big package ready to go. Come talk to us first. And I think that's just something, a tone you can set within your own locality. Word will get out. I mean, folks know in Sussex, your first stop is not the planning commission office. You know, it's Commissioner of Revenue to get your land maps. And then the second or third stop is sitting down with the county administrator and the crazy blonde lady at the Virginia Diner to talk about what you want to do. And I think we've avoided a lot of pitfalls that way. But the law's silent really on that, other than they have to meet with you to discuss a siting agreement. But you know, we just try to. And again, you know, being in the wood business, talk to a lot of loggers. I know where cutting is going on. I'm smart enough to look at our map and go, but I know what that's going to be. You know, I'll get in my truck and drive up to a job. I'm not afraid of that. Hey, what you doing here? But you know, somebody has to do that, and you know, not everybody has somebody who wants to do that. But I try to stay on top of it.
All right. Any staff or any planning commission members have any questions?
A couple of planning commission members
Yep, planning commission members out there, and we got a couple citizens here. Any questions?
Lay it on me.
When someone cuts timber, they're supposed to notify Department of Forestry.
Yeah, and I had just a discussion with the state forester about that last week. Here's where that gets tricky. And I'm not done with this yet. So, on a normal timber harvest job, they are supposed to notify DOF, and DOF does a pre-harvest and a post-harvest inspection. And DOF, bless their heart, wants to stay as far away from this as possible. I don't want to get involved. And so my discussion with the state forester, who I know well, was, hold on, land under option is not a conversion yet. This is not a development until the locality says so. And this is where the damage is happening in that gray area. That 2 or 3 years of aggregating land and the developer getting the project together, and this is where we are losing buffer left and right. And so my conversation with the state forester was, look, can the locality be notified if the land is under option and our buffer is 100 feet from any primary or secondary road? The consultant forester, the owner, the developer, I don't care who it is, mark your buffers, mark your buffers. Flag them, paint them, tie big pink bows around every tree. I don't care how you do it, but mark your buffers. And then, when there's a pre-harvest and post-harvest inspection, why can't that be on your checklist? Buffers are here, and at the post-harvest inspection, the buffers better be intact. We don't want to get involved in that. We don't want to get, so DOF is, in my opinion, taken a way out because they're saying it's development. But I contend land under option for something that's dependent on a local government approval is not development yet. And so I really want to take that fight. If I have to take it to the General Assembly, I will, because I think that is an incredibly important piece of this argument. The pre-approval timbering is causing sediment problems, environmental problems, wildlife habitat problems. The cutting of really any of it before it's approved. Now, the trick is, and this is where I'm willing to concede, these projects want to get built, time is money, the developer wants to get them built. If you're a landowner and you put your land under option for a solar development, or if the developer, if you outright sell it and they buy it, everybody's anxious to clear so construction can start once they get their approval. Again, clear on the internal until your heart is content. Just leave the buffer standing until there's a thumbs up or thumbs down from the local government. But in the state forester's opinion, that engagement with the landowner is development. I contend it is not. And so again, there might be a smarter lawyer than me, or maybe the General Assembly needs to settle the question, but in my opinion, and again, I say this being in the wood business, knowing how DOF inspects logging jobs, it would seem logical to me that if land is under option for a solar project, well and good. Just keep your buffer in place until there's a thumbs up or a thumb down. And if the locality decides, nope, we don't like this project, the timber owner can finish harvesting the trees and plant more, knock yourself out. But until you know if you've got to screen something, it's in everybody's best interest to keep the trees standing. And again, being sensitive to the property rights of the landowner, we're not denying you the commercial revenue from these trees. It might simply be delayed revenue until the locality takes its action. Nobody's saying you can't make money off those trees you have to leave standing. You're just not gonna make it in the same month or same year that you made the rest of the money on the trees in the middle. You know, again, nobody's trying to deny timber rights. And I'll tell you, I was called in on a situation in Dinwiddie County where, and this, you know, there's so many moving parts and again, I haven't been smart enough to connect all the dots, and nobody else has yet either. So then you get a case where a logger buys a tract of timber. The logger doesn't know it is under option for solar. The logger bids on that tract for every stick. He does a timber cruise. I'm going to pay you blank an acre because I've cruised this, and this is what the standing timber is. Lo and behold, the logger comes in and cuts it, and then somebody, and in this case, the developer found out that the buffer might be cut. Oh, no, you can't cut the buffer. Then the logger looks at them and says, well, you're going to make me whole for these trees that I can't cut because I paid for these trees that you say have to stand here. Now, that's a horrible miscommunication. And so now you've got the logger involved that's bid on the timber. So, you know, there's so many moving pieces. And again, I don't know what the answer is. I'm trying to get a meeting with the Solar Developers Association because this is a nut that we have to crack.
Well, see, here with forestry, we got concerns with Chesapeake Bay Act.
Sure.
And you may have internal cuts, but you could have a ravine, or they staying far enough back, you can go right into the bay.
Yeah.
And sedimentation, as you clearly corrected,
Yeah.
or mentioned, goes, that's one of our
And
concerns.
again, that's a problem for anybody that is a Chesapeake Bay community that has to live and die by the E&S rules of the bay.
Yeah.
It really is particularly, I think, incumbent on the landowner to fess up, for the logger to be aware, for everybody to be aware that this may or may not be a solar development. But until we know, you know, for St. Pete's sake, at least leave your buffer so we can help the bay, we can help the critters, we can help the county, and ultimately help the people that live here that may have to look at it. And so I beat any developer that comes to Sussex. I'm like, you cut one tree in that buffer, I'm going to find where you live and I'm coming after you. So again, we try to do that, you know, through word of mouth, to just say, and again, we're not depriving someone of their revenue on that land. Cut, you know, but just hold off on those trees on the outer perimeter until we know what's going to happen. And I think, you know, and again, remember, the landowner is getting paid for the lease under the solar developer. So they're getting a double bang for their buck because the trees are being cut and they're getting paid for the lease. You know, they could hold off on some of the tree cutting till the situation's been resolved. So, but again, I don't have a process for that. State forester just runs every time he sees me coming and covers his ears. I don't want to get involved. They really don't want to get involved, but I'm trying to figure out how do we connect these dots in a very process-driven way so it's uniform everywhere. And I don't know what that is yet, but.
All right, anyone have any more questions?
Double versus single.
Double row, oh,
You have two panels on one array. Some of them, they started it with one.
Yeah,
And
right.
Richmond County is two, and I think I've actually seen some places, they've got three.
Three. I would say that I think technology is changing. And I think that's one of the decommissioning questions. And my analogy is the cell phone. Remember, I'm old enough, my first cell phone was in a bag that was about this big, that it was in my car, the bag phone, and now your life fits in the palm of your hand. In 20 years, where are these solar panels are going to be? Are they going to be the size of this table? Getting the same juice? We don't know. But I think you'll see the developers try to make the most of the technology, and I think they're trying to get smart about maximizing the footprint because localities are You know, some places are getting pretty full, and I think, I contend, it is my crystal ball, they will run out of willing space before they hit 16,100 megawatts.
How many do they have right now, to your knowledge? Your best estimate.
I think the latest from Aaron Berryhill is we've got, and Blake, correct me, somewhere around 3,500 megawatts.
So we got about a 1/5 of
We're,
what?
we're about, well, maybe between a fourth and a fifth of the way there. I don't see, and I don't think people are gonna let them put enough windmills off Virginia Beach. So I think, and I've said it before, I think we're gonna have a train wreck somewhere around 8,000 or 9,000 megawatts. Because there's just potentially not gonna be enough space, enough willing owners, enough willing localities. I know everybody wants that number in the VCEA. I just don't know if it's gonna get there. I don't know. I don't know. But I think, to your point, I think developers are realizing they've got to maximize their footprint and maximize the technology because land is getting scarcer. Willing localities are getting scarcer. Room is getting taken up on the grid. They're going to have to get smart about the footprint.
So when they present your, is that part of it?
We have, under our zoning right now, all they're gonna have is a single panel because I believe we have a max of 15 feet in height. So if they wanted to come to us with that kind of array, we would require a zoning change. But again, we did that piece of our zoning when it was unheard of to have 2 or 3. You know, that's what I'm saying. The technology is changing even since we did our zoning, and I like to think we're kind of up on it, and, you know, we've already changed our minimum acre size, you know, once, so.
What is your minimum acre size?
We have a minimum of 100 acres because, and I don't mean to try to influence y'all, just in my opinion, with our land mass, our population, we're 492 square miles and only 9,600 people. So we got a lot of open space. So for our county, my sort of counsel to our board, and I think they've agreed thus far, is to make the juice worth the squeeze. And if we're gonna put our planning staff through all of this, and we're gonna go through all this, we want medium to large projects. Because the revenue options are simply there for medium and large projects. So if we're gonna go to the trouble, you know, I want the opportunity for a 20 or 40 or $50 million siting agreement. So we have a 100 acre minimum, a 5,000 acre maximum, and on this one big project, we would have to change that number. We do not do, the other trend is Halifax and Charlotte counties, I believe, do a percentage of land mass. I can't remember if they address individual project size. Some do both. Some have an overall land cap. That land cap can be achieved by listing your number of acres. We're only going to have 10,000 acres in solar. Brunswick County did it by percentage of land mass, and I think they're like at 2.2% of land mass. So there are a lot of ways you can skin that cat. We don't have an overall number. We have a project size number, minimum and maximum, so we can address every project individually. Now, will we eventually say we're all filled up? Yeah. And I think everybody's going to get that way. And again, going back to the 16,000 megawatts, is everybody going to cry uncle before you get to 16,000 megawatts? And in my opinion, my crystal ball could be off, but I think the answer to that is everybody's going to get over it or full of it and before the 16,000 is reached. And then the General Assembly is going to have to do something.
Back on decommissioning. Looks like every time you mention decommissioning, the solar company always wants to set the dollar amount for decommissioning. Say, well, it's worth $100,000 to decommission it. How do you determine what?
Well, what we do is Tibbins Engineering is our county engineer. So what we do at the applicant's expense is Timmons works with us to help develop our decommissioning numbers. And again, my other prediction, and I was on the state, on the SEC decommissioning study. I was on that panel. And that didn't achieve what I was hoping it was going to achieve because there were more developers on that panel than local government. I think Joe Lurch and I were the only local government people on it. But I think everybody is under bonding decommissioning by at least 50%. And I include my own county in that. I think if we were to truly require money in escrow or a bond of some type that really addressed decommissioning, many of these projects would financially fall apart. Now, having, again, and one of the things that came out of the SEC study was, how do we get over that? Well, we get over that because, again, remember, your two big expenses are ground remediation and solar panels. If we develop in this country, at least in the eastern part of the United States, there is an endemic solar recycling and production out on the West Coast. Remember, it started in Arizona, New Mexico, California, and the desert. They're good, but the trucking or training cost of sending solar panels from the East Coast to California, New Mexico, or Arizona is cost prohibitive. So one of the things that came out of the decommissioning study was, as solar panel production and recycling develops its industry on the East Coast, are the bonding numbers we are developing now, they might actually be okay. Because if the recycler, the manufacturer of the panel, is bearing that expense, and that is off our backs and off of the developer's backs, then what we're posting for bonding now may well be enough to do soil remediation, because the solar panel industry has taken care of that piece of it itself. And that was one of the recommendations. I didn't bring the final report with me, but I think basically one of the things that came out of the SEC decommissioning study was, it would really behoove the industry, wink, wink, nod, nod, guys, pay attention, to get the solar manufacturing and recycling east of the Mississippi, because that is going to be one of the big answers to decommissioning from a financial point of view. So, again, 30 years from now, 40 years from now, you know, you're not going to be here and I'm not going to be here to deal with it for our locality. So I think it's going to be incumbent on us as localities to really make sure we press the development community. Hey guys, you know, this panel problem has got to be solved. The manufacturing and recycling has got to be solved, because we're not going to solve it. And there's not enough landfill space in North America to hold them all. So you better figure this out, you know?
Yeah, you take a project, it costs $1 million to put a small project in 30 or 40 years, it's liable to cost $1 million to take it out.
Exactly, exactly.
So if you don't have at least that amount,
Right.
you haven't done anything.
You haven't done anything. And, you know, that's where I think really harder discussions need to occur. You know, again, being in an equipment-intensive business, you know, you're paying these equipment operators a lot of money an hour.
Yeah.
You know, moving dirt is expensive. It's real expensive. and it takes time. And, you know, again, your poor Mecklenburg County, where all their topsoil in their project ended up sold one county over, you know, that's why that forward thinking of you must bank your topsoil on site, and you need to bank it in a way that it's going to sit here. And, you know, thinking forward on that decommissioning, on the physical aspects of it. Everybody gets hung up on the money, and I'm like, you've got to figure out how are you spending your money. Again, understanding equipment and what you pay an equipment operator and how expensive it is to move dirt and da-da-da-da-da. You know, I figure, what does it cost an hour to do it now? And then double it for 40 years from now, and there's your per acre amount.
Yeah,
Um,
that's correct.
And I think developers, when you start doing math that way, the number gets real high real quick. And that's why I think, you know, a big piece of the puzzle is the panel manufacturer and recycling piece needs to be solved by the industry in a way that is doable, environmentally friendly and responsible, and also financially viable, because, I mean, you talk about a train wreck 40 years from now, if that problem isn't truly, truly solved. Nobody's going to be smart enough or rich enough to get your way out of it. Nobody. So that's the piece of the Wild Wild West. That's the unknown. And that's the piece that keeps me up, so.
From what I understand from state code, correct me if I'm wrong, when the solar developer presents a decommissioning package, it's stamped by a Virginia licensed engineer. And the locality cannot question that number because that engineer is standing behind it, people are licensed. So even if you were to hire tenants, you can't go back and negotiate that number with them because state code says that that guy's a licensed engineer, and so his number stands. Now, at the 5-year point, I think we start doing corrections.
Well, and that's the 5-year
25-year
point.
30-year point, things of that nature.
Yeah.
When they first submitted, we can't come back and say that's not a good number because state code won't allow it.
Yeah,
Well, just because they're stamped doesn't mean they can't make mistakes in their calculation.
That's true.
Yeah,
We
I
have to
mean-
hire an engineer to find those.
Well, I'm not saying, but yeah, that seal of approval we can guarantee, because my father was a surveyor, he went to court because his opinion was an opinion, and until the person sitting behind us, over there actually, said, that's the boundary line, he gave an opinion. That's actually a scientific opinion that really gets borne out when the rain comes or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's an opinion, but you've got to have somebody else of equal weight to challenge it.
you know, I would try to have, and I think this is the decommissioning discussion is the most uncomfortable discussion for developers.
I personally don't think decommissioning is going to happen. Once they get Love Atlantic's approval, that's going to be a solar site until the cows come home.
Cows come
because
home.
Like you said, at some point, it's going to hit a brick wall. People aren't not going to want to work with the company and lease it. So if they've got their foot in the door, then they're going to keep their foot in the door.
Yeah.
And I don't think they're ever going to revert it back.
And
That's the landowner. The landowner ever lease, and the landowner wants to kick them off. That's
They
the only thing
can't.
I think is going to happen.
And it's interesting because when solar was sort of a nascent industry, there was a lot of land being purchased. And now it's flipped almost entirely to most of the land being leased. And I think the solar guys realized, it's easier and maybe ultimately cheaper if I don't actually own this land. Yeah, and that goes back to the 16,000 megawatts. I think sometimes the notion of we get very twisted about this used to be a cornfield and it needs to grow corn again. You know, the truisms of the world are we're making more people every day. And every person born is going to be using more and more electricity than the person before them. So when you take sort of the world view, I don't see how we get out of not doing anything but making more and more electricity from any source we can find. So to your point, is decommissioning really going to happen? And I do think you're correct. It is going to probably happen in the instance where the second or third ensuing generation decides they want their land back. And, you know, I think that's probably where it'll happen. But it doesn't, we still have to try to responsibly financially cover ourselves in the worst instance if the thing does have to be decommissioned.
Any other questions? No other questions?
So these are the kind of fun conversations we have every month on our calls. So it's, like I said, we'll often have a special guest in on a particular hot button item. We usually have the SCC come on in the fall to talk about any legislation they're going to have for the next General Assembly. We decide if there's anything legislative we need to fix. Every call, we do a round table where every locality goes around and basically, okay, guys, what are you hearing? You know, what's happening in your locality? And what we have found is, I think our members find that round table the most informative because everybody learns from everybody else's success or failure. Oh my gosh, we did this, it was a disaster, don't do it. Or this was our idea and the developer bought it and it seems to be working. You know, I think the one thing about, you know, our group, we're geographically spread apart and everybody's working with different developers, but that kind of round table sharing of, this was the hard lesson we learned. I mean, I've been the poster child for cutting buffers and dealing with the developer to replace 7,411 trees. I mean, everybody's hair blew off their head. 7,400, yes, that's what the site plan, that's what we've got to plant to replace what was lost. So everybody learns from everybody's horror stories, success stories, you know, things they've learned positive, things they've learned negative. So, you know, this is kind of what we do, so.
All right. Well, I really do appreciate you coming, and I think the board and everyone else does, is we've picked up a lot of information.
A lot of good information.
Dave, we have a comment?
Yes, sir, I did.
All right.
You just thought I could talk.
Well, I know you can talk,
You may not, she's got a PhD in talk as.
but I think she may have you beat.
I might. I might, but I learned from the best. There you
That's
go.
right.
Let's take a break. Yeah. Take a break.
Take a break?
Yep.
We may
All
not
right.
want to repeat, you may not want to repeat some of your stories in here either now, Dave.
That's right, that's
I
right.
can talk about a bedpan.
All right. We're gonna take a 10-minute break, and we'll be right back after 10 minutes.
All righty.
Been 10 minutes?
Yeah, good enough.
All right, we'll call this meeting back to order. Any discussion on anything, or you want to go into closed meeting now? All right. Walter, you got the
All right.
wording for the closed meeting?
Yes, sir. I need a motion that the Northumberland County Board of Supervisors convene in closed meeting pursuant to Virginia Freedom of Information Act, Section 2.23711A29, discussion of the award of a public contract involving the expenditure of public funds, including interviews of bidders or offers and discussion of the terms or scope of such contract, where discussion in open session would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body. Invited to attend closed meeting as necessary are the county administrator or assistant county administrator as they are deemed necessary, and their presence will reasonably aid the board in its consideration of the topics to be discussed pursuant to Virginia FOIA Section 2.23712F.
So moved.
All right, got a motion, got a second?
Second.
All right, got a motion, second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are now in closed meeting. All right, welcome.
All right, I need a motion that the Northumberland Board of Supervisors return to public meeting and certify by roll call vote that only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements by the Virginia Freedom of Information Act and as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered during the closed meeting.
All right, have a motion? Is there a second?
Second.
All right, roll call vote. Mr. Long?
Aye.
Mr. Brand?
Aye.
Mr. Tomlin?
Aye.
Mr. Haney, aye. Mr. Jett is absent.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we go with Southern Air pursuant to the contract which was previously drafted and reviewed by our county attorney.
Second.
All right, we got a motion and a second. Any other discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Before we close or carry over, Ms. Tadlock, could you put in the budget the figure for the solar coalition, just to put in the budget, so we can have that figure in there for your figuring the budget up, and then we can make a decision?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
All right, well, we need to have a motion to carry over till the fourth, on the fifth.
It's 4th. I so move we carry over to May the 4th at 7 p.m.
All right, got a motion, second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you all for coming today.